Welcome to the 128th season of the Canadian Club Toronto, Canada's Podium. For over a century, this platform has been a gathering place for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to discuss the most pressing issues of our time.
We've been having important discussions and debates around this podium in this country for well over a century. I call this a historic podium of record.
Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank them for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Hello, everyone. We're going to begin now. Thank you so much for joining us. Good evening and welcome to the 129th season of the Canadian Club Toronto. My name is Colleen Kennedy and I have the profound honor of being the executive director of the club. And with all the options that you have right now with TIFF and all of the things that you have to do to spend your time on a Thursday evening, I really appreciate that you're all here to have this important discussion with us. And for those of you online, and I know there's over 100 there, welcome as well. Thank you for spending your time tonight with us. So I'd like to begin with the acknowledgement that the land we gather on tonight, Takaranto, is the place in the water where the trees stand. A land that has always been a meeting place to share knowledge, strengthen community, and imagine futures together. Canadian Club of Toronto carries forward that tradition. In convening conversations that shape our nation, we honor the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, as well as all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people who call this city of Toronto home. May our gatherings continue in that spirit, to listen, to learn, and to build collective hope and prosperity. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsors, Deloitte, Torys, Davies, Ward, Phillipson, Weinberg, for their generous support, and we are proud to present this program in partnership with the dais at Toronto Metropolitan University. And to set the stage for tonight, I am pleased to welcome Jake Hirsch-Allen, past director of the Canadian Club Toronto and Director Partnerships and Advocacy at the dais.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much again for being here. My name is Jake Hirsch-Allen. I'm a director at the dais and a former director here at the Canadian Club, and it really feels wonderful to be back home. It's been a long few months for me. We actually, with my family, I've got a 1-year-old, traveled the world trying to figure out where we wanted to live, where we wanted to make a new home. And after being in Italy, Spain, and Japan, we decided that Toronto was it. We came back, and we are so in love with this city and this community that particularly after 7 years at the Canadian Club on the board here, it feels wonderful to be back in front of you all, and I'm so grateful to have you all here on this important issue. I've had a rough few weeks, as some of you know, and it's just, again, great to be surrounded by one of those many chosen families that have made this city home. And the issues we're talking about today are issues that I've been thinking about for a really long time, probably since law school, which I won't say is how many years ago, and that the dais, the think tank that I work at, has been working on since it was the Brookfield Institute and the Ryerson Leadership Lab, just to say long before now. For those of you who don't know us, as Colleen said, we're a think tank at Toronto Metro U. We're their Public Policy and Leadership Institute, and we work at the intersection of tech, education, and democracy to build shared prosperity and citizenship for Canada. We believe in a simple and powerful promise that Canada should be a place of equal and shared opportunity. That promise depends on systems that shape all of our lives, from the economy to our institutions to democracy. And many of those systems aren't working the way they should these days. We see it in rising inequality. We see it in runaway tech. We see it in an economy where a handful of companies are winning big while many others struggle to grow. I started a couple small companies. One of them, I am embarrassed to say, went bankrupt recently. That's also why I left big tech to join the dais. It's also why this evening's conversation is so vital. Competition policy isn't abstract. It's about whether Canadians have real choices, whether innovation thrives here, and whether businesses of all sizes can succeed. It's about whether our economy works for the many instead of the few. At the dais, our research looks at how policy can help close that gap, how we can look at how Canada can support scale-ups to compete on a global stage, how we can ensure our homegrown tech sector is competitive, ensuring tech workers are paid fairly, how well-designed innovation incentives can actually move ideas through to impact. What ties all of this together is competition policy. It's competition and good policy that is essential to building a fair, innovative, and prosperous Canada. Good competition policy helps to address our national priority of cost of living pressures. We believe that informed dialogue, like the dialogue that the Canadian Club uplifts every day. We called it the dais because it's all about uplifting policies and ideas, and I think there is few organizations in Canada that do so more than the Canadian Club. And so that's why we're so pleased to be partnering with the Canadian Club and hosting the Commissioner today. For a long time, the Canadian Club has been leading critical conversations on Canada's economic and civic future. This evening's discussion comes at a pivotal moment as major reforms to the Competition Act take shape. The choices made now will echo for decades, influencing innovation, productivity, and the everyday affordability of life in Canada. On behalf of the dais, thank you to the Canadian Club for co-presenting with us, for hosting us all. Thank you to the Commissioner for joining us and our other host. And thank you all for joining this timely conversation, and competition. We look forward to a thoughtful dialogue about how competition can help Canada seize this moment and secure a future of shared opportunity for us all. Thanks all.
Thank you so much, Jake, for doing that so ably. He was in a life or death situation only 2 weeks ago. So great for that you're here. So to our featured conversation, Matthew Boswell has served as Commissioner of Competition since 2019, leading the Bureau through a period of major reform, new enforcement powers, and unprecedented public attention. On a more personal note, Matthew and I go back a long way. In the 1990s, we ran for student government together at Queen's University. It was Kennedy, Boswell, Perry. Sadly, the student body didn't quite share our vision at the time. But we like to think we had plenty of great ideas and at least a loyal circle of friends that came out to support us. Of course, Matthew has gone on to far greater victories. Under his leadership, the Competition Bureau is driving some of the most significant changes to Canada competition laws in decades. Changes that will influence innovation, productivity, and growth for years to come. His perspective on what's at stake and what lies ahead could not be more timely. No pressure. Matthew will be joined in conversation with Umang Khandelwal, an antitrust and competition lawyer at Davies, Ward, Phillips, Weinberg, and Weinberg LLP. We will open the floor to some questions later on in the evening. In the meantime, please join me in welcoming Commissioner Boswell and Umang Khandelwal.
That's very important. Okay. Sorry.
Thanks, Colleen, and a very warm welcome from my side as well, Matthew. Today we have a room full of policy leaders, business leaders, and their advisors here today. I think it's important, and I do want to start and level set and have you describe from your perspective, your mandate, and its importance to the Canadian economy. So let's start there.
Okay. Thanks, Umang. Good evening, everybody. Thanks very much to the Canadian Club, the DAIS, and TMU, and to Colleen and Jake for the kind introductions. Just before I dive into your question, apparently the theme tonight, my notes from people at the Bureau tell me, is Canada's Competition Moment, which is a great title and theme, whoever came up with it. Even more so, given where we're at right now, and in fact, what we heard yesterday. For those of you, some of you may have heard this already, but yesterday our Prime Minister gave a speech at the end of their caucus meeting and talked about affordability and how important it was for this current government, how important it was for Canadians. But then he went on and said that, led by the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Industry, we will keep finding ways to increase competition for the hard-earned dollars of Canadians in telecom, in banking, in retail, across our economy. So it's clear to me from that, those comments in the speech yesterday, and a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about tonight that's happened in the last 4 years, is that Canada's competition moment is truly alive and well, and I'm going to suggest it's picking up steam, which is great. So back to your question. What is my mandate? So my mandate is to administer, at a high level, is to administer and enforce 4 laws, Competition Act, and 3 labeling laws that I'm guessing a lot of you haven't heard of. And I won't get into that. But when it comes to competition in Canada, my mandate, the Bureau's mandate, is twofold. It's to protect and promote competition in Canada. Protect generally means enforcement. It means doing intelligence, scanning the environment, digging in on cases, forcing companies to give us evidence, analyzing that evidence, determining if there's a problem, and if there's a problem, telling them, do you want to solve the problem or do you want to go to court? That's what we do on the protect side. That's enforcement. Promote is something that is equally important. We advocate to governments at all levels for pro-competitive policies throughout the Canadian economy. And as you'll hear later on, this is incredibly important in this country. We have a huge problem with regulations that hinder competition throughout our economy. So protect and promote. And just as Jake was saying, the importance of competition in our economy right now can't be understated. And I'll probably say this, 20 times, 30 times while I'm up here, but we have a real competition problem in this country. And we've had one for decades. We have rapidly declining competition intensity, competitive intensity. We have very high concentration rates. We have affordability issues. And all of this, what does that all mean? If we can work to fix that as a country, we get lower prices, more choice, better service, innovation, productivity growth. Productivity growth is a crisis, and competition is a key part of the solution to that in this country. So I think that's kind of a high level. Oh, and I run the Bureau, which is like 500 people, 4 offices across the country, and all sorts of interesting stuff.
Okay, so you've talked about why competition matters to a healthy economy. And I also just want to pick up on your comment earlier that you mentioned competition is picking up steam. But the reality is competition policy often finds itself in competition with other priorities and policy areas. So let me ask you, if I can, if you are to make the case right now during what has been described as a hinge moment for Canada, why should competition rise to the top of the policy agenda?
Because effective competition policy and a culture of competition in Canada will drive the benefits that a lot of those competing policies that you talk about are seeking. Competition policy drives productivity. And don't take that just from me. That's from last year, the Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, Carolyn Rogers, made a speech that got tons of ink. It was called Break the Glass. And she said that the main cause or the main component of our productivity crisis in Canada was lack of competition. And the OECD, which I like to think is a highly respected, evidence-based international organization that doesn't have any skin in the game, in their 2025 economic survey of Canada, they said Canada's shortfalls in productivity growth points to a need for greater competition. And as I say, if we, in this very uncertain context that we're in, with all sorts of issues coming at us, affordability, global uncertainty, rising protectionism, breakdown in our trade relationship with the United States, tech disruption, we can address a lot of the problems that we're having by taking a whole of government Canadian approach to saying, look, we need to fix competition in this country, and the dividends that it will pay, certainly in the medium term and then in the longer term, like for the economy my kids are going to inherit, will be huge.
Right. But I do want to acknowledge that there is a debate about whether competition enforcement should give way to industrial policy. In your view, do you think that we need to balance protecting competition in Canada versus ensuring Canada's global competitiveness?
I think that that's a theory that was popular in the 80s, that, we need to have national champions so they can go out and win on the world stage. Well, there aren't many good examples of that in Canadian history. In fact, you got like a famous Harvard economist, Michael Porter, who says, paraphrasing, unless a firm is forced to compete at home, they're highly unlikely to succeed competing abroad. And maybe a little joke. And by the way, I feel like I'm a stand-up comic coming up to the stage with this. It's kind of embarrassing, but anyway, it's Colleen's fault. Also why we lost the election. No. Anyway, where is she? I can't see her. So a joke that we use on this whole, we gotta protect Canadian companies so they can go out and compete. It's like saying, imagine yourself saying, okay, 4 years, I'm going to the Olympics. And to train, I'm going to sit on my couch and eat Cheetos. And everything's going to be cozy and easy. How do you think you're going to do at the Olympics if you don't have to face any competition at home? I think that theory has been soundly sort of put to bed. And in fact, our Prime Minister, for those of you who don't know, did a doctoral thesis in 1995, was the subject of some discussion. It's called The Dynamic Advantage of Competition. And it was focused on this exact question. And he wrote that, I'm quoting, an increase in domestic competition, even in countries with open markets, is associated with improved national competitiveness. And he recommended strict antitrust enforcement. So I think that theory, we should all put that to bed and move on.
Well, thanks for those reflections.
Thoughtful.
And now it is, since you've become commissioner, it is worth noting that the Bureau received a major budget boost, and the Competition Act has, as Colleen and Jake mentioned, seen substantial reform. These changes have shaped what some consider to be one of the most robust enforcement frameworks since the modern Competition Act was enacted in 1986. Looking back then, what were your ambitions when you first stepped into this role almost 6 years ago? What kind of impact were you hoping to make setting out?
It was actually 7+ years ago when I took over as interim commissioner, and then there's a whole process. But I guess probably initially I was like, God, I hope I get out of this alive. But when I went and met with the interviewing committee, I talked about being a big believer in vigorous enforcement, evidence-based enforcement, obviously. I come from a background of enforcing different types of laws, a little nastier laws than this particular law. I also talked about the need to focus on the digital economy as an organization, and talked about empowering the employees at the Bureau, who are truly incredible, very intelligent, very committed public servants. So did that, and then when I was appointed, I sat down with big groups of the Bureau and we talked about what the plan was, what the strategic vision for the organization was. And we arrived at that pretty quickly by consensus. And the overall vision was pretty ambitious, I would say. It was to become a world-leading competition agency, that is at the forefront of the digital economy and champions a culture of competition for Canada. So protect, promote, and the three key pillars of that, which have been the same three key pillars in our 4-year strategic vision and then in our annual plan every year, have been enforcement, taking stronger, more decisive action against anti-competitive conduct, especially in sectors that matter most to Canadians. Groceries, telecom, housing, digital markets. And I'll just say on that, I wanted, and my colleagues wanted, us to develop a culture of, it's hard to explain, not asking like, what are the risks of going to trial? What are the risks of taking this case? But asking the opposite question, which is, what are the risks of us not doing anything about this, not trying? And also a culture of accepting that we're not always going to win. Like I used to be a Crown attorney, and the cases that went to trial were the cases that were sometimes in the gray area, and you were going to lose them sometimes. You don't want to lose them all, obviously. But so that was the sort of enforcement pillar. The promotion was advocating honestly and forcefully for pro-competitive policies. Wherever we had the opportunity, wherever our resources would allow us to spend the time, because there's a never-ending list of things we can engage in terms of advocacy. And then the third pillar from the get-go and still today is investing in our people, in tools, training, digital technology, keeping our people up to speed as much as possible, so that we can work towards achieving that bigger vision of being a leading competition agency at the forefront of the digital economy and promoting competition in Canada. So that was the plan. I can't say how we did. I was grading my own homework, but I can tell you in May 2019, I gave a speech to the Canadian Bar Association here in Toronto and said, we've got a mountain to climb to achieve our vision, and there will be some course corrections. Obviously, there have been many course corrections along the way. COVID kind of threw a little loop in there for a while, other things. And the goal was to arrive as an organization that is better placed to tackle all the challenges that lie ahead. And I think we're there in the sense that we're better placed. We're not perfectly placed. There's always work to do. And said, the sort of trite saying, we're going to plant some trees for future generations. I think we've planted a lot of trees for them to get shade under going forward. We got, as been pointed out, we finally got our budget increased after literally decades of atrophy. In real terms, declining dollars, declining number of people, a much more complex economy, much bigger economy. And then that was in 2021, and then 2022, 2023, 2024, sweeping reforms to the Competition Act. 2 of the 3 passed unanimously through Parliament. So there are still many things to accomplish, and we're constantly working on getting better.
Okay. I want to dig a bit deeper onto enforcement. So fast forward now, we have a new era of competition law enforcement, stronger laws, higher penalties, an expanded ability for private parties to bring claims for anti-competitive conduct before the courts. You've talked a little bit about this, but if you could sort of expand on it, how significant do you think these changes are, and what can consumers and businesses expect to see from the Competition Bureau?
Yeah, so I've already sort of spoken to this briefly. I mean, the changes have literally introduced a new, the line I've used in the past is a new era of competition enforcement in Canada, and we're still in the early-ish days of that new era. I mean, when you add it up, and I was doing it last night, making my notes, I think there are something like, and this isn't the whole list, these are just the kind of major changes to the law, 25 significant changes to the law in these different bills that have gone through Parliament. They're significant across the board. People will debate where the most significant ones. I would say probably in merger review. The merger review regime had the most significant. We now have a modern law that aligns better with international best practices, with our peers, with our neighbors to the south. All sorts of things, streamlined legal tests, common sense presumptions. I know there's people in this room who are shaking their head when I say that. More accountability with the expansion of private access. So we'll see private enforcement tick up. Well, we think we'll see private enforcement tick up. I think we're still in the waiting period to see how that pans out. Much stronger available remedies to fix the problems than we had in the past. And potential penalties have been increased really across the board. The greatest example, well, there's 2. One, we used to have a cap on cartel fines at $25 million per agreement, which always kind of drove me crazy because a cartel can have huge volume of commerce, economic impact, and you get a cap. If you have one agreement, the max you can get fined is $25 million. So that cap is gone. And then in our deceptive marketing practices work, we used to have a cap of $10 million administrative monetary penalty for your first go-round. And we brought a case against Facebook in, can't remember the year, maybe 2019, that was the same as, very similar to a case that the Federal Trade Commission brought in the United States. They had a couple of additional angles on the privacy side, but they got a $5 billion fine, and our cap was 10, and they resolved it early or early-ish. So we had to give them a bit of a discount, so they got a $9 million fine in Canada. That didn't seem right to me. So that was one of the things that I advocated for in the amendments, was to change some of those things. And of course, the Bureau budget increase, we've really used those funds to strengthen the team at the Bureau, to strengthen the tools we have. So I would say very significant changes in the last 5 years. And what can businesses and consumers expect to see? I would say you're already seeing the early days of it, which is we're bringing more cases than probably ever before. We're willing to litigate. We've increased the size of our legal team with more litigators. We want to get the right remedy, and if we can't get the right remedy through a consensual resolution, we will take cases. We will use, in the investigation stage, we'll use all the tools at our disposal. We've been very clear about that for years, and we are doing that more frequently to get the evidence. We often face challenges, and we have to fight. And you'll continue seeing that. So that's on the enforcement side. And on the promotion side, we're going to continue to beat the drum about a culture of competition in Canada, about removing public restraints to competition through regulations and laws, and advocate for the country to finally, put competition policy at the center of the organization of our economic affairs, so that Canadians are screaming for that, and have been since at least 2022. We have polling numbers that show, 88% of Canadians feel like they're being taken advantage of by big companies. 2023, 90%, 93% felt, similar feelings. So at least as long as I'm still in the job, that's what you can expect to see, and then we'll see what happens.
I want to shift now to enforcement decisions and talk about intervention in markets. At a time where Canada needs more innovation and business investment, how do you get the enforcement balance and market intervention moments right? And do you think where we're at right now, is there a risk of under-regulation or over-regulation of markets?
I don't think, well, first of all, we're not engaged in regulation. We're a law enforcement agency that enforces a law that's designed, ostensibly, to protect competitive markets. And as its enforcement, not regulation, what we do is very targeted, highly fact-specific, highly context-specific. We're not just going off and saying, oh, everybody can't do this. We have to actually investigate it and take it to court. And our investigations are driven by legitimate, evidence-based concerns of anti-competitive conduct. And I say concerns intentionally because that's what we're investigating. Sometimes we get through the investigation and all the competition lawyers in the room will know that there are cases that we investigate and we get to a point we say, no, this isn't anti-competitive. We're not going to bring a case. That's our job. And, I think maybe the other point to make is anti-competitive conduct by its nature, restricts those things you're talking about, restricts innovation, restricts lack of competition, dampens business investment. I mean, there's a very clear StatsCan report, 2023, I think, where it's like the lack of competition in the economy it causes a downward tick in business investment in the country. I can't remember what year that was. I may have that written somewhere. 2023. Thanks, Vass. Somebody with a brain in the audience. That's very good. And the final thing on this little rant I'm going on, sorry. We have finite resources, no matter how much the government's increased them. But we have finite resources. We have to pick our cases carefully. Just to use mergers as an example, there's about 3,000 mergers a year in Canada, around 210 that are notified to the Bureau. Like a tiny sliver of those result in SIRS or result in a deep investigation. Most of them are non-complex. Most of them are resolved in less than 10 days. In fact, our service standard on non-complex in the last fiscal year was 100%. So I don't think there's really any risk of over-enforcement. I do think there's a risk of under-enforcement, and I think we've had under-enforcement for a good chunk of the Bureau's history. And I don't say that to be critical of my predecessors. You play with the tools you're given. That's not a good one, but you do what you can with what you have, what the Competition Act gives you, blah, blah, blah. And we've had a weak act. We've had, as my immediate predecessor said, we had the weakest merger law among all our peers until a year ago. So it's not a critique of people that came before. It's just the reality. So I think that's the biggest risk is, backpedaling on amendments or backpedaling on resources for the Bureau. Then we get back into under-enforcement. And, maybe it's I'm drawing too close a link, but look where we're at with affordability and high levels of concentration and, competitive intensity dropping like a stone for 20 years from 2000 to 2020. Like, we can't go back there as a country. That's my answer.
I want to circle back to your point about picking cases and ask you about priorities. How does the Bureau go about setting its priorities? To what extent are the Bureau's priorities influenced by broader economic conditions or informed by views of stakeholders, particularly across the business, investor, and consumer communities?
Yeah. So we say pretty publicly, and I think we've said it in this year's annual plan, we focus our efforts where competition matters most to Canadians. That's kind of a very sweeping statement. But, we look at, when we're setting priorities, we look at the economic impact of or harm to competition in the economy. How broad is it? What's the consumer harm? We do environmental scans to see what might be coming at us. Areas that we either want to look at in terms of enforcement or look at in terms of advocacy, like both parts of the mandate. We use this sort of light to look at things. We ask the question, where can we make the biggest difference for Canadians? How significant is the sector? Are there emerging potential risks in a particular area that we need to study? You asked about stakeholders. The Bureau team talks to people throughout the economy all year long, whether it's civil society, businesses, constantly talking to businesses who are working in particular sectors, whether it's talking to them on a particular case, talking to them on a market study. We're paying attention to what various people are saying about how the economy's functioning. Are markets failing? Is competition working in a sector or an area? We have very good, deep relations with regulators in Canada. So we talk to them about what they're seeing. And of course, we also have very deep relationships with our international counterparts, and often get together with them and discuss what they're seeing, what problems might be in their jurisdiction that could come to ours, or that company X is operating in multiple jurisdictions and they're seeing this behavior. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that gets tossed into the pot. But at a high level, it's like, what should we focus on that's going to matter most to Canadians? Because we have finite resources. And I guess the other important point is there are many occasions where we can't pick cases. A merger comes in and it's problematic or looks really problematic or is problematic, and the parties don't want to resolve it, and that's their right. So then all of a sudden we have to put a whole bunch of resources to that, or there's some really bad cartel conduct that all of a sudden comes on the radar and we have to put resources to that. So it's not a world where we just sit there and pick our cases. We have to be also responsive to what's going on in the real world.
Okay. I now want to look at the future of Canada's competition regime. You've said previously that the next big gains in competition policy are to be made in reducing governmental barriers to competition, and you sort of alluded to that earlier as well. What does this look like, and what is the Bureau's role in these broader efforts to open up markets within Canada?
Okay, so I'm going to start this answer by apologizing to everybody who is a competition lawyer and who's attended speeches of mine in the past, because you're going to hear the exact same thing. So, and I've already said it a bit tonight, we have a huge problem in this country with regulatory barriers to competition. And I'm not just talking about at one level of government, I'm talking about every level of government. Federal, provincial, territorial, municipal. And interestingly, so on one side you have enforcement of private restraints. So that's companies allegedly behaving badly, we go after them. There's a bit of expansion now because people can bring private suits. But so those are the private restraints. Public restraints on competition are laws, policies, regulations that sometimes completely unintentionally hinder competition, hinder market contestability, hinder people actually growing, getting big, all sorts of things. And we used to be okay in this area. And I'm going to give you some stats. The OECD does something called product market regulation indicators. And they are indicators of how regulations hinder competition in member countries, OECD member countries, and actually other countries who are like associate members of the OECD. 1998, shortly after Colleen and I lost the election, well, actually it was like 6 years, we were 10th out of 28 countries, and higher is better in terms of fewer regulatory barriers to competition. So 10th, not bad. Top kind of third. 10 years later, 2008, we were 18th out of 34. So now we're getting into the middle. 2018, 33rd out of 34 countries in the OECD for regulatory barriers to competition throughout our economy. And then the OECD rejigged their work a bit and came out sort of off cycle in 2023. We are near the bottom in key sectors including energy, telecom, transportation, and professional services. We also rank poorly on barriers to foreign investment, public procurement. So it's a huge problem. And if we were to fix it, what would it mean? It could mean, there's a study, and I can't tell you the study. If you want to talk to me or email me after, I can give it to you. But that we could grow the economy by as much as 5% by removing all these regulatory barriers to competition. And there's another study that's not quite out, but I know it's coming out, that points to even larger potential gains by attacking this problem and attacking it at all levels of government. And I don't want this to be misinterpreted as some sort of libertarian rant about no regulations in society. That's not it at all. This is about like targeted looking at the regulations, talking to people who actually live and breathe these regulations, laws all the time, and find out which ones need to be modernized, which ones need to be tailored so that they're meeting whatever policy goal the regulation has, but they're not doing that and also hindering competition unintentionally or intentionally. Sometimes they're intentional and incumbents have lobbied for them because then they get a barrier, a moat around their oligopoly. So how do we do this? And this is also something I've been ranting about, which is we adopt, and this is from the top, this is from the federal government and senior politicians in the federal government, we adopt a whole of government approach led by the federal government, where you convince through either money or suasion or people, voters, you convince provinces, territories, municipalities to get on board, and you go out and you look at the different regulations. You hear from people who operate in the marketplace who tell you, like, these are the problems, and you attack them. And some people here who haven't heard this rant may think, oh, okay, that's great. How are you going to do that? Well, we have a template. Australia did this in the 1990s. The Australian Productivity Commission and the National Competition Policy. And this was from the top, from their prime minister, and they intentionally looked at 1,800 laws and regulations at all different levels in Australia, repealed them, amended them, all with a competition lens. And conservative estimates of that work say that it increased Australian GDP in the 90s by 2.5%, or about 5,000 Australian dollars per household. And guess what? They're doing it again because they know how important it is. The Australian government is currently rebooting that whole exercise to go even further. And so that's what we've been saying at the Bureau for several years now. This is what we need to do in Canada to attack this huge problem, holding our economy back. It's an unforced error. It's just kind of shooting yourself in the foot to hold our economy back. And I should say, Sorry, this is a really long answer. I should say that we are seeing green shoots, right? Like there was this whole awakening, it seemed to me, about interprovincial barriers, and that we needed to get rid of those. We could really get our economy revved up, and that's a great example of a regulatory barrier to competition. And we saw it, was it last week? The Ontario government talking about, labor mobility, professional mobility, non-competes. The Bureau's talked about getting rid of property controls in the grocery sector because those hold competition back. And not only do they hold competition back, they create food deserts for poor people. It's really bad. So we are seeing some green shoots on this, and I'm really hopeful that with this sort of what we at the Bureau call this great awakening in Canada to the importance of competition, that this will continue to move forward. And we're there to help. I mean, one thing I should have said at the beginning is we're it for Canada. Like and I don't mean this in a braggy way. It's kind of sad. Like we are literally the only government center of expertise on competition in this country. And, people might say, oh, well, of course you are. We only have one bureau. But you look around the world, and like in the United States, it's not just the federal government, the FTC and the DOJ. Every state has antitrust people, competition people. But we're it for Canada, and that is what it is. And we got coast to coast to coast to take care of. But we're there to help. We have lots of expertise. We could be sort of attached to this government project at large. I mean, we'd have to sort of look at our resources and figure it out. But I think it would be an incredible initiative for our country to take on. And, the Biden administration and the Trump administration, the Biden administration did this aggressively. There was a White House Competition Council. Everybody at the cabinet table had to report on what they were doing to enhance competition in their department of the U.S. government. And of course, President Biden, as he was, made the famous comment that I love. Capitalism without competition isn't capitalism. You've heard this before. Capitalism without competition, I'm forgetting the...
It's exploitation.
Exploitation. Forgot which word it was. Is exploitation. And that's so true. And, it's even carried into the Trump administration where he's directed the FTC and the DOJ to help all these departments look at how they can remove regulatory barriers to competition. Sorry, that was a long rant.
But judging by the length of your response, sounds like you're really energized about this.
Yeah, so I said it in one or two speeches.
But I think that's a very nice place to end, and it's been great talking to you. I think we'll now go to the audience.
Oh dear.
All right. I think sneak over here. Thank you both.
Thanks, Colleen. Thank you, the Commissioner, and obviously Umang for moderating the conversation. So a legal framework is only as good as people's trust in the enforcement of the law. And so I'm curious, given that the Competition Bureau being the only sort of legal enforcement mechanism for the Competition Act, what you have done to improve trust in the Bureau to increase confidence in Canada's sort of competition regime.
Wow. I guess it depends who you ask. I mean, we routinely put things out into the public where we're pretty clear about the evidence upon which we're basing it. And we always talk about how we're an evidence-based organization. Sometimes, as I said much earlier, sometimes courts don't agree with us, but we're always putting things out and with as much information and detail as we're allowed, because we deal with a lot of confidential information, and so I hope that enhances trust. And it's actually, you bring up a good point. Another thing we've been doing for several years now, which is all about communicating to Canadians, is we have a focus on speaking to Canadians in plain language. Like when I came to the Bureau, I used to read things that we were going to put out publicly. And it would take, I mean, I'm not a smart guy, but it would take me like 3 or 4 times to be like, what are we talking about here? And so we've gotten, well, I think we still have work to do, but we've largely gotten rid of that. Everything is plain language. Everything is explaining to Canadians what we're doing and why it matters to them in their daily life. And the reality is everybody here, when you walk out your door in the morning, maybe before because you're on devices and stuff, competition is impacting your day, one way or another, good or bad. So we need to get out of the technocrat world, and we need to explain it to Canadians because that drives decision makers. If Canadians appreciate what we do and want more of it. I hope that answers your question.
Colleen has my vote too. Quick piece of advice. Don't say sorry. You are an incredible competition commissioner. We love hearing from you. You've been fighting good fights and pushing for good changes. Let's talk about the elephant in the room for a second. 1, 2, 3, 4. Trump's declared a trade war. Yep. How are we going to calibrate and also communicate to Canadians that there's going to be economic pain ahead, that things are going to be more expensive, be it through sellers' inflation in anticipation of more tariffs, be it because of other restrictions? What does that do for the Bureau, and is that why we need more of a whole-of-government approach? But how does the Bureau's work start to intersect with this trade reality?
Yeah, that's a good question, Vass. I mean, obviously, from a competition perspective, protectionism, tariffs, very bad for competition domestically, or if we're retaliating in other countries. So we're very mindful of that, but that's kind of the end of our ability to control the situation. What we can do, though, is be very vigilant and talk to people in the procurement world, for example, or vigilant in other sectors that are badly impacted competitively by trade issues. You know, we have to watch out for people using this as a cover for anti-competitive conduct. And that sounds like, he sees a boogeyman everywhere he looks. But it is the reality. We've seen it in history. People use sort of events to cover up conduct, to increase their prices, to collude. So the Bureau has to be more vigilant. And competition is even more important when we're going to see a decline in domestic competition because of these trade issues. So we need to, this goes back to the whole of government. We need to figure out other ways to let our economy flourish. And this whole of government thing could be a fabulous way to see some significant uptake in the economy. That's not a good answer. But anyway.
Thank you so much to both of you for this great talk. Commissioner, quick question. I want to push on something Vass said around the trade war, but specifically in the context of technology. The U.S. regulators, FCC, FTC, they're not really acting quite impartially right now. You look at, they didn't really drop the hammer on Google. And the FTC even intervened in a case to basically steal a contract away from a Canadian space company and give it to an American one. So I want to push on this. What is the Competition Bureau actually going to do to protect Canadian interests, especially tech companies, when there's killer acquisitions of our quantum companies, chips, just in the last several months? So curious about that.
So, I mean, I'm not going to comment on the initial part of your question. Well, maybe what I'll do is actually partially correct you. I mean, the Google decision was a judge's decision in the United States, and that's the way the system works. So that particular judge, who's, as I understand it, very well respected, made a remedies decision that felt was the right one in the context. So it wasn't really the agencies. I mean, look, the bottom line is we, the Competition Bureau and the U.S. Antitrust competition enforcement agencies have incredibly deep, long-standing working relationships based on, pick up the phone relationships and cooperation. And that continues. We continue to cooperate. There's transborder transactions where we work together with them. And I hope that will continue. It is continuing as we speak. It's almost daily. Somebody from the Bureau is talking to somebody at the FTC or somebody from the DOJ. I can't really comment on the second half of your question. Quite simply, it's just too political for me. We're in law enforcement, evidence-based, and we'll do what we can to work with our American colleagues.
Okay, we're running out of time because the commissioner's long-winded. Here we go.
Well, I'll save time. I'll save a couple seconds, and I won't do a long thank you. So this is awesome. So piggybacking off of the big tech point, we kind of have all these throwaway terms like runaway big tech, and the analogy I like to use is like Pandora's box or genie in the bottle. And when you talk about restoring competition, like throwing back to 10 years ago, all these performance metrics, it really optimal enforcement depends on your reference point, and it depends on if we're imposing or improving the existing guardrails given the path we went down, or do we have a mandate to maybe try to put the genie back in the bottle and correct the history dependence of previous under enforcement? And so, of course, you can feel free to deflect as much as possible, but just where do you see that dichotomy or that dilemma facing the CCB?
Yeah, I mean, we're a creature of statute, right? We can't go back in time and say, okay, we need to do this, we need to do that. We have to, bring current evidence before the courts. I mean, obviously governments, national governments can do things through bills that change the competitive dynamics, but that's not something that the Bureau can do. But you raise a good point in that, this is the biggest challenge for the Bureau, is staying or working really, really, really hard to stay on top of an incredibly fast-moving digital economy. And we've made pretty good strides in that regard. In the last 5 years, we've created this digital enforcement and intelligence branch. And but that is certainly our greatest challenge going forward, because it's moving so fast. And as I've said multiple times, we have finite resources, and we need to figure out how to be there when the harm happens and how to be able to take action, to do something about it. And that is a huge challenge for an agency. It's a huge challenge, I think, for pretty much, for all competition agencies in the world right now, is staying up to speed and delivering for citizens by being able to bring action in a timely way when there is anti-competitive conduct. And I think these are not I'm not opining one way or the other, but this is the great debate in the global competition community right now, is should you regulate up front, or should you chase after and your cases take 7-8 years to get through the courts? And, I think that's going to be the great debate in every country. And we're obviously seeing pushback right now around the world on regulating up front. And it's not really something that's come on the radar in Canada, but it's a huge challenge. And so I didn't answer your question at all, but that was the objective. Sorry, I'm very honest.
All right. Well, I think that's it. You feeling like that's it? Or do you want another question with the beer?
One more.
One more question.
Well,
Who wants to be the brave soul? All right.
has to be a good, easy question to end on.
What's your favorite color?
Like, how awesome was that Jays game today? There you go. There you go, Cal.
Easy question, Matthew.
Yeah.
When I was in office, we took on some of the airline proposed transactions, mergers, pretty vigorously, as did Howard Weston. There's been a decline in the number of airline mergers over the last 20 years or so. But it's very positive to hear the Prime Minister's remarks about the importance of competition policy yesterday. And we all know, fairly stated, that there are real concerns across Canada pertaining to the lack of competition in the airline sector.
Yep.
In Canada, we rank toward the bottom in transportation, as you said. I know in the OECD. You talk about protection and promotion of competition. What is the Bureau going to do with respect to, and I wrote on this with Larry Schwartz and others a few years ago in an article that was published. What is the Bureau going to do about promoting much different standards for foreign ownership, so that we can see increased foreign ownership in Canada, so that some of the major airlines, such as U.S.-based airlines, can enter Canada either directly or through acquisitions? And what are we going to do about promoting cabotage, all to increase real competition and bring lower prices and more choice to Canadians? The airline sector is really a hot potato right now, as we've seen in recent weeks.
Yep. And as you know, Cal, we published in June the results of our competition in the passenger airline sector market study, and very deep dive into the competition issues in passenger airline services in Canada. And we talked about the concentration. We talked about how it had gotten a bit better with some new entrants, Porter's expansion, Flair, all that stuff. We talked about the issues in northern remote regions. And then we made, I think it's 10 recommendations to the government, including increasing the foreign ownership to 49%, allowing foreign ownership of domestic-only airlines. So if you're going to start a Canadian airline that just flies inside our borders, doesn't matter where you're from, you can own it. But arguably the most important recommendation from my perspective, from my experience as commissioner, is to get rid of the Minister of Transport's public interest carve-out for airline mergers, which I've now done, I think, three of them during my time. So WestJet Sunwing. So, sorry, just for those of you who don't understand the intricacies of this, when it's an airline merger and the Minister of Transport determines that it's a national transportation undertaking and that it's in the public interest, that they make the decision goes out of the Competition Bureau Commissioner's hands. My job is to provide a report on the competition concerns and then to provide a report or a letter on how to remedy those. And WestJet Sunwing, I was very clear in the report, it's public. This is a merger to monopoly on multiple origin destination pairs. I said it shouldn't be allowed. It was allowed by the government. Another example was Air Canada Transat, where said it's anti-competitive, and it was approved in Canada. It was stopped ultimately by the Europeans because those flights landed in Europe and they took jurisdiction. So in our report, our recommendation, I don't know if it's number one, is stop this. Let merger review and the Bureau, based on evidence and if necessary trials, determine whether an airline merger is anti-competitive or not, and let the chips fall where they may. So, I invite everybody to read that report. It's very comprehensive. We make recommendations on how to improve air transportation in the north and in remote areas, which includes, once again, tailoring regulations to the north so that we can allow more smaller airlines to fly to the north, using government funds government investments to create airports in the north that aren't owned by the large airlines. There's so many recommendations in there, and we hope that the government will act on most, if not all of them, to improve competition in the passenger airline sector, which Canadians have been demanding for a long time. So thanks for the question.
Right.
That's the end of my...
That's it?
Yep.
You're good? Done? You
Last
finished your
week.
beer? You finished your questions? Well, thank you, Matthew. I had Commissioner Boswell here, but I'll say Matthew, for sharing your time and insights with us this evening. The work you are leading at the Bureau is vital, even more so as we hear tonight, to Canada's economy and to Canadians. And we wish you every success as you continue to navigate this period of change and reform. A big thank you as well to Umang for guiding a thoughtful and dynamic conversation with a challenging person to...
That's what my kids say.
And once again, we are deeply grateful to our sponsors, Deloitte, Torys, and Davies, and to our partners at the dais for making tonight possible. I also want to encourage you to visit our website at canadianclub.org to explore our upcoming events and to become perhaps a member. Members get priority seating, discounts, other advanced things, and we help to get you engaged with leaders across the country, just like Matthew. And we do have a busy fall ahead. On September 18th, we host Ansley Wallace, the CEO of Hoop. And then on the 29th, we have John Graham. We have a pension fund series, it seems. John Graham from CPP Investments that will join us. And I think the deputy I think she's going to say a lot of great things. We have Carolyn Rogers on October 9th, so don't miss that, because I think she's going to continue her break the ceiling commentation as she speaks about fintechs and productivity and how we move forward in Canada. So don't miss that. It's a breakfast on October 9th. So on behalf of the Canadian Club Toronto, thank you for being with us. Thank you, Commissioner Boswell and Umang. We look forward to welcoming you all again soon. The bar is open downstairs. There'll be more food. And have a great evening, and we'll see you again soon.